If you're visiting this morning, I want to introduce myself to you. I get the privilege to be one of the pastors in this church, and my name is Vidal. And today we are going into part 2 of the book that was written by Jesus' little brother. His name is James. And if you missed last week for any reason, if you're coming back after being gone for a while, let me just give you a heads up or what we have done and where we're heading today. So we began last week explaining that James is the one book that helps us to put things in perspective in the context of trials, tribulations, problems, and specifically as you look at the title of your handout, when life does not bring things together, when the things are not lining up. They're not adding up. They're not coming together for you, whether it's emotionally, financially, relationally. Maybe for some of you, might be spiritually, and you're battling this whole thing about God, the existence of God, believing in God, whatever the case may be. What happens when your life looks like this Rubik's Cube, and you know exactly what the byproduct is supposed to be when you engage into trying to create or to shape this cube, because some of you have done it in the past. So when you got married, when your child was born, you knew what the outcome was supposed to. Some of you have come to Christ because of the promises that God was going to do things in your life that you knew exactly how it was going to end up. The problem, though, is that even though we have a picture of what we believe, or we think, or we understand is supposed to happen, many times what happens vocationally, what happens maybe in the context of family life, it looks exactly like the one on the screen. It's not lining up. Is not making sense. See, James is the younger or one of the youngest brothers of Jesus Christ. He is the son of Mary and Joseph. And one of the things that James is going to have to learn as he is a part of a culture 2,000 years ago in a context that was chaotic, there was a lot of abuse, there was a lot of mistreatment, there's a lot of abandonment. James learns after the fact that Jesus is long gone, after Jesus dies and comes back from the dead, he realizes, he has this encounter with God, that the brother that he grew up with was actually God. So a transformation of his life comes into place that we read last week on chapter 1, verse 1 of the book of James. We read, this is how he introduces the letter. He says, "This is James, the servant of God and the Lord Jesus Christ, my big brother." So that understanding, that transformation of him becoming the servant was basically exemplified that spiritually, now hear me say this, spiritually, in the concept of relationship with God, through Jesus Christ, your life will always make sense. What does that mean? That means that you, James, and you, if you're a follower of Jesus, you have been made whole in Jesus Christ. There is nothing you need to add to the equation. There is nothing you need to take away. There is nothing that you need to contemplate. In Jesus, through the work of Jesus, by the life of Jesus, through the promises of Jesus, you have what Abraham obtained back in the book of Genesis when he believed and it was counted or accredited to him for righteousness. What does that mean? That all that you need is to put your trust in Jesus, and your life spiritually is going to make sense. Now, the challenge for James that we discovered last week is that he is writing the letter after he is making sense of his belief system, meeting the big brother after receiving or embracing Jesus as Lord and Savior. He writes, this is chapter 1, verse 1. He writes to the 12 tribes, which means the Jewish brothers of his people, that they were scattered. What does that mean? That those who have believed in Jesus, please listen to me, believing in Jesus, being transformed by the power of Jesus, having a good standing with God in life, did not guarantee for this people a good standing in society, a good standing socioeconomically, a good standing in the context of the world that they were in. Implication that he's writing to a bunch of Christians that they were persecuted, that they were going through the deepest of sufferings and trials. So I'm going to say it again. In your relationship with Christ, James writes like this. This is James spiritually. Many of you, this is where you are in your beliefs with God. The challenge is that maybe in society, maybe in finances, maybe emotionally, maybe intellectually, we're struggling. We don't know exactly where we're standing. So James, last week, helped us to understand the what. The what of the series is simply, what do you do when your belief system is not matching with what you see around? What do you do when you hear from the scripture certain promises, certain prophecies, and sometimes based on what you know and you've been told, based on what you believe wholeheartedly, is not matching on what you are perceiving? What do you do? What do you do? We're in the midst of persecution. What do you do when you are the victim of a system that is broken? What do you do? Well, I'm glad you asked, because here is what he told us. This is from last week. He told us on verse 4 that this whole experience of the disconnect of maybe your belief and what is going on in your life is with the purpose, happens with the purpose that you and I may be found mature and may be found complete. Translation, this is what it means. The implication of James from day one, from last week, is simply that you stop, I need to listen to this. You need to stop thinking that the ultimate goal is heaven. We believe in heaven. Heaven is part of the deal. And we love the experience of thinking that we're going to go to heaven one day. That's great. But what if I told you that James is saying, before you go to heaven, your job and my job, based on our ability given by God to be found mature and complete, is to bring heaven to earth? What if the purpose of you going through life right now is to stop saying, oh, one day, someday, we're going to get there, no more crying, no more pain, no more suffering, but instead, what if you and I become catalysts of rebuilding and reconnecting a broken world with the God of the Scriptures? What if, for us, the task is to be found mature and complete? So, see, when you focus in heaven, you try to walk through life on a non-conflict, non-warfare type of environment. See, Jesus never promised that the world was going to look like this prior to his arrival the second time. He never promised that. He only promised that he will equip you to face the reality of this world. That implies, once again, that you are mature and you are complete. The reason why many of us are going through trials and tribulations is to be found mature and complete, to the point that, here's what he said last week. At the end of the conversation, that maturity, that completeness is reflected on lacking absolutely nothing. See, some of us struggle with this concept because some of us, we are for being mature and complete. We are for growing and experiencing new things with God. But the problem with that is many times we go through this expecting that the world is going to change. See, he never promised that the world was going to be different. All that he promised is that you will lack nothing. Everybody tracking on this? That's the promise. Not lacking anything. So the question now comes, if you are a believer of Jesus that is striving for maturity, for completion, we call this in Bible Christ-likeness. You're growing into the image of Christ right now, not in the future, right now. If your mission is to bring heaven to earth, as you go from earth to heaven one day, why'd you want to do this? What's the purpose of you being found complete and mature? Well, I'm glad you asked, because this is the purpose. The purpose is that we will learn to carry each other's burdens, to carry each other's problems. See, I said this in the past and I'm going to say it again. For most people, the tragedy, and I'm not minimizing people's suffering because I'm far away from knowing what you have gone through. But all that I'm saying is this: would it be possible that maybe the tragedy for suffering in the world, for suffering in our lives, is not necessarily the problem or the issue or the suffering, but is that we face this suffering alone instead of having someone to carry us through? Instead of us understanding that the reason why you are here today and you survived whatever you went through 3 years ago, 5 years ago, is so you can carry somebody else as well. And I remember, he is speaking to the 12 tribes. He's speaking to the persecuted church that they were known. Please listen. This people, this generation of Christians, they were not known primarily by their theology or their doctrine or their structure as churches. You know what they were known by primarily? Their generosity. They were taking care of the widow and the infant and the orphan and the destitute. That's what they were known for. They really understood that maturity and completion, Christ-likeness, is reflected that you lack absolutely nothing and you're able to carry each other's situations and tragedies in life. Now, the question that we're going to face today, this is where we're going for the next few minutes, is the question of how do you do this? I hope and you embrace the why and the what. I hope and you came last week and you are, okay, I get it. I understand that I'm here to, walk in Christ likeness so I can be mature, so I can be complete, so I have nothing to lack. And at the end of the day, I don't live for myself, I live for others. Okay, so how do I do that, Pastor? Well, I'm glad you asked, because this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. Verse 5, here we go. Put up your handouts, pull out your Bibles, open your apps, whatever you have. Let's go. Here we go. If. Now, the word if, in most cases in the Bible, not every single case, but grammatically, when he uses the word if, is having a major tendency, inclination to affirm what he's about to tell you. So in reality, what I would like for you to do this morning, without really tampering with the scriptures, I'm not changing the scriptures, but I want you to read it by saying since instead of if. Since any, hopefully, any of you lack wisdom. Instead of saying if any of you, let's just affirm and say, okay, since any of you, since there will be some among you that you're still thinking that the whole thing is about avoiding hell and going to heaven. See, that's not the purpose. The purpose of your salvation is not so you can just avoid tragedies. I'm all for you to avoid tragedies. Do not make crazy decisions. That's what we're talking about right now. But it's not just simply to avoid tragedies and pain and suffering. The goal is completion, is to be in a position of bringing heaven to earth. So he says, any of you lack wisdom. So here's what I want to say to you. One of the things that is going to help us to understand how to navigate life when life does not make sense, it doesn't add up, is for you to understand that the antidote is not for your marriage to look like this. See, again, you marry a broken individual, and you are a broken. I am a dysfunctional person who married a dysfunctional individual. We're broken vessels, right? So marriage is never going to look like this. The antidote of the craziness of this world is wisdom. What's the opposite of wisdom? When you're wise, what's the opposite? Foolishness. So think about for a moment. See, most of the brokenness of this world is simply the foolishness of this world. It's people making decisions that, look at what it says, you should ask God. It's people who are behaving in the opposite direction. See, when you, watch this, when you see yourself as someone who lacks nothing and you lack no wisdom, you're basically saying, I am wise, and this is typically how this plays. We typically look at the neighbor, look at the wife, look at the in-laws, look at everybody else as fools. Like you guys will fix your life if you just ask me. How? Are you struggling with raising your kids? Just come and see me. I'll tell you how to. See, that's typically the mindset of somebody who believes or thinks or behaves that he lacks nothing. So this is why typically that individual is not going to ask God. See, the concept of asking God is somebody who sees the need or has the awareness to actually ask and expect to receive something from God. Now, here's the thing about God. See, God, please listen to this. God, before he tells you what to do, he's going to show you his character. Can somebody write that one down? This is important. Before he tells you what to do, see, if you're a parent, you relate to this. Because see, discipline without love produces rebellion. Isn't that true? Discipline without love. See, the reason why I discipline my kids is because I love them. Hopefully that's the case. But then the opposite is true. Love without discipline is just a crazy situation about a bunch of entitlement. And then, anyways, it just goes crazy from there. So here's the point. The point is that this God reveals his character because for those who recognize that maybe I lack wisdom, maybe I love Jesus, but see, I have forgotten that the Old Testament, based on what the wisest men said, and the wisest man in the Old Testament or in the history of humanity, his name is Solomon. And he basically portrays in the book of Proverbs wisdom as a person. Is everybody tracking? See, John, which is the beloved disciple, this is the disciple that walked the closest to Jesus. He gets to the point where he opens his writing of the gospel that he wrote, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. John chapter 1, verse 1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with, see, this is the Logos. This is the concept of the Greek mind that basically believed that this Logos, this Word, was literally wisdom. So what John is saying is basically this: wisdom, which is the antidote of the brokenness of this world, is not the absence of conflict. Wisdom is not simply a different mindset. Wisdom is not avoiding foolishness. Wisdom is a person, and his name is Jesus Christ. So when we talk about the God who gives this generously, is literally a God who does not multitask. This is a God who gives this specifically. Now, if you are a Christian right now, if you're a believer, listen to me for a moment. This wisdom is portrayed in Christ likeness. Wisdom is simply the ability to start seeing the craziness of the world through the lenses of what you have believed already. Is everybody tracking on this? Most of us, we believe in God. We just struggle to see the brokenness of the world and our craziness through what we believed. So many times, it's not that we don't know what's right. What we're supposed to do is just we struggle to apply it in this regard. You see what I'm saying? So in this case, we're talking about Christ likeness, that we developed, the person that we embrace. This is from last week. The person that we welcome, the truths that he said about himself, and ultimately the lifestyle that I'm trying to emulate. Now I'm bringing all those things into decision making of everyday experiences. So at the end of the day, watch this. He gives this wisdom. He gives of this experience, of this reformation, of this transformation. He gives it generously, and he gives it to how many? Those who behave? Those who come to church? Those who stop the door? See, he gives it to, now listen to me. You got to remember, go back to the context. Chapter 1, verse 1. He's writing to the 12 tribes that are scattered. So he's writing to Christians. Please listen to me. This wisdom, this Christ-likeness, this development of the character of Jesus is available to anybody who asks. If you are not a Christian, it's also available to you. The only difference is if you're not a Christian, it's available to you through the person of Jesus in salvation. So for you to get this all without finding fault, without saying, God, well, you first need to love your wife, or you first need to, straighten out your marriage or your finances, or get those habits out of your system. See, he's basically saying it's available to you. Those who will confess that Jesus is Lord will be saved. Those who put their trust in Jesus, they will find salvation in Jesus. So either way, if you are a Christian, this is Christ likeness, the development of the character of Jesus. If you're not a Christian, this is salvation for the first time. Listen to what he says at the end. And wisdom, will be given to you. It's available. So in your handouts, what I'm trying to tell you is basically wisdom. It begins with wisdom. How did you navigate a life that does not add up with wisdom? How do you do this whole marriage, finances, sickness, illness, brokenness, craziness? How do you do this? With wisdom. You ask for wisdom. Now, here is a warning. But, when you ask, now you understand that some of you lack this, some of us lack this, some of us have not met the God who gives it to all, gives it generously. Some of us, we struggle because we think that we have to change certain things before God can actually do something in my life. No, he says, anybody who asks, and anybody who actually gets to the point of asking, anybody who is vulnerable enough to say, I don't have it figured out, I'm trying, I know exactly what I believe, I just struggle from my belief to my decision making, I struggle from my belief to my emotions, I struggle from my belief to my intellect, I struggle from my belief to my sexuality. If that's you, and you still have the freedom to ask for this wisdom, he says, when you ask, here's the catch. Here's the catch. You must, come on church, you must believe. So let's talk about belief for a moment. So this believe, and again, this is connected to last week. This believed is not the ability that you and I think we have, that you and I may have developed. Nothing against what you've developed, nothing against who you are and what you've done. Please listen to me for a moment. Believe is not faith in God. Can you please listen to me? Believed is not just saying, I believe in God, I trust God, I pray to God, I have met God, I know God. Believed is embracing the reality that I'm called to trust the trustworthiness of Jesus Christ. Do not rely on trusting your ability to trust God, because you and I know, come on, one of the reasons why James writes this letter is because the people that were supposed to be found, verse 4, complete and be found faithful, that were given up in their faith. Remember? That they were literally discerning from the faith. So we know throughout history that many people used to be in church, right? My parents grew up in church. They're not here anymore. My brother used to be in church. And anybody, some of you are coming back to church again because you kind of went and then you're coming back. So you and I, we cannot rely on our own ability to trust God. Can I just put it to you very simple? I hope I'm not confusing anybody, but listen to me for a moment. Believe or trust or faith is a gift. It's not something that you possess. It's something that God gives you. So at the end of the day, if you have at your handout, believe is simply the unconditional love that God in His sovereignty, He chooses to give you the ability to trust. Not that you will do the right thing, not that you will get your life in order, not that you will improve and make the best decisions. You're basically having the ability that regardless of what takes place in life, you are putting your trust on the person who is trustworthy, and His name is Jesus. That implies, listen to me for a moment, that implies that even though you may find yourself not really believing sometimes, you may find yourself doing what it says next, doubting. Please look at me for a second. You have understood that when you place your trust on the trustworthiness of Jesus, you are declaring that the Father is okay with me, not because I'm good, not because I'm better, not because I left a bunch of things in the past and now I'm a brand new person, second marriage, third marriage, now things are good. Now listen to me. I believe I'm in good standing with God because Jesus satisfied the requirements of the Father, and when I put my trust in Jesus, everything is good with the Father. The point of the story is the Father. The point of the story is about that this Jesus is trustworthy of my ability given by God to put my trust in Jesus. The Bible even says it this way. It is a curse. You are cursed if you put your trust in men. Have you heard that before? So I'm just saying this right now because some of you grew up in church. Some of you come from a long journey of ministry and loving God. And I'm just telling you, man, I'm the first one of those that we grow into this mindset that as long as I know my right theology and I'm not like those crazy people in the prosperity gospel or just like my brother-in-law who got divorced and my son. See, if I'm bringing back the self-righteousness. See what I'm saying? I'm bringing back saying, I do not like wisdom. You need wisdom. I have it figured out, man. This is why none of my kids are pregnant or, I'm not divorced. You start excusing why you are right and everyone else is wrong. Faith is not trusting your ability to hunger God. It's your ability to say, Jesus is trustworthy. And Jesus alone satisfies the Father. Now, here's the tricky part. If this is true, then now it creates, again, the catch. The catch is that many of us, when we put our trust in God versus trusting the trustworthiness of Jesus, and we try to fight for believing in God, or trying to come back to God, or do the right thing, or pray harder, instead of just trusting in Jesus and that Jesus is trustworthy, then what we do is translate, look at me for a moment, we translate unconditional love as an unconditional relationship. Can you please listen? Some of you ladies need to listen to this carefully as you do life with your husband. Maybe you do life with your parents, that maybe they are older now and dealing with some elderly issues. Maybe raising the next generation of boys. If you have sons, ladies, you gotta listen to this. See, when you embrace the trustworthiness of Jesus, which is a gift, Jesus is a gift to you. You did not earn Jesus. Jesus was given to you as wisdom, part of what we're describing. And you put your faith in Jesus does not imply that you can do whatever you want because at the end, I'm going to heaven. That's not how it works. So I'm standing in line in one of those public places. I won't tell you where I was because then you'll know where I was and then things may get complicated. But it was a good place. Please don't start any rumors. But I'm standing in line. There's about 2 people in front of me. And then I remember walking into the office and there's a bunch of ladies behind the glass. And there's a lady with a maybe a 3-year-old, 5-year-old sitting on one of the sitting areas in the same room. It's a small room. And that's it. It's just a lady with a son. I think it was a son. I don't remember. I think it was a son. And then me, another guy, another lady. And then the ladies behind the glass window. And we're just waiting for our turn. And the phone rings from the lady. And it's a praise and worship, very well-known praise and worship song. That's the tone, ringtone. And she picks up the phone and just goes crazy on the phone. And at the end of the conversation, I remember the ringtone. At the end of the conversation, blink me, blink you, pound, hangs up. The guy in front of me, she didn't know that, but he was a police officer. He turns around and just goes off on the lady and says, I can arrest you. And she goes on this crazy thing with the lady and just this huge argument. Here's what I'm trying to tell you. I'm like, lady, I don't know who you talked to. I think it was a son. I don't know, whoever that was. She was talking to whoever, got on her nerves. I was just like, do you mind, if you're going to use that language, can you at least change the ringtone? You had this huge praise and worship song that just came out of your phone, worshiping Jesus, and you come this crazy. Now, again, I'm not being judgmental because we do the same thing all the time. Don't we do that? I mean, look at Jesus. Come on. Jesus, he comes and says, you've heard it before that you should not commit adultery. What does Jesus say? Anytime that you lust after a woman, you heard it before. Anytime, you should not murder. But anytime that you see what I'm saying? So we're all into this whole mess. All that I'm trying to tell you is this. Make sure that unconditional love, the love of God that gives you the ability to trust, not God, but trust the trustworthiness of Jesus Christ towards the Father, is not a blank check, do as you want, there's no consequences, you can do whatever you want with others. This is why in this verse he says, no doubt. Please listen to me for a moment. The conditional relationship is based, please listen, I'm fixing to close and pray with us. The conditional relationship is that the goal is not that you doubt your ability to remain faithful to God. You know what the problem is? The problem is not, see, because again, some of you are firstborn, very firstborns and very driven, very, very task-oriented. I'm glad you do those things, and I'm glad you're good at what you do. Listen to me. This is about not doubting God's ability. Anybody that you believe, anybody that you put your trust on your ability to relate to God, anybody that you grow into entitlement, worshiping God, seeking God so nothing goes wrong with you and you better not have any issues. You better get the right, doctor's diagnosis or whatever. Any time that you look at God and says, how dare you, it's a sign that you're not trusting the trustworthiness of God. You're just simply trying to trust God on your own. That implies that most of the time we are fearful to doubt our ability to be right with God. That's not the point. You're not the point. I'm not the point. Who's the point? The point is that you do not doubt God's ability to do what He promised when life does not make sense. When the cube doesn't look the way it's supposed to look. So this is why James closes for us on verse 7, simply saying this. If you are in this place that you're trusting your ability to believe because you come from a religious family, because you are so-and-so, because the knowledge you have of the Bible. See, if you are the person that you are more concerned, like Paul, not necessarily that you are avoiding sin, because no one avoids sin, but Paul told us about 3 weeks ago that it's not that he was blameless when it comes to the law, but he always had the right sacrifice for the sin. If your drive is avoiding hell instead of pursuing holiness, he says this. He says that person should not expect to receive anything from God. Is that harsh? Is that hard to read? And I'm saying this because I have 3 kids. And when my kids have needs, it's a pleasure for me to meet their needs. I love to meet their needs, right? But now you have a father who will give absolutely nothing to this individual, whether you're a Christian or non-Christian, regardless of who you are, to the point that verse 8 says, such a person, the person who receives nothing from God, the person who is hearing absolutely nothing in the context of God, is a person that is known by dual allegiance, dual faithfulness, dual soul, dual heart. So in 2012, about 4 years ago, I had the privilege to fly into Addis Ababa, which is one of the capitals of one of the countries in Africa. And we made multiple stops from McAllen all the way to there. So the point that we stop in Frankfurt, we stop in Austria, Vienna, and then we finally make it to Addis Ababa. I did not know, and I forgot, or I didn't pay attention, but we made a stop about an hour and a half prior to get to Ethiopia. And on that very last flight, we landed I thought we were in our final destination, but we weren't, apparently. We landed in this place, and I'll tell you where it is, and we landed, and this is in the dawn of day. It's just barely coming. I mean, you lose track when you're flying because of the changes of time. And I remember that we landed, and as we landed, I'm looking through the window, and I'm seeing military people from this country, wherever we were, and I didn't know we were. I seeing people landing on the landing experience on the trail of the airplane landing on the runway, and I see this military people literally, laying down on their bellies with their machine guns, all across the whole runway of the airport. And I'm looking outside, and I'm saying, what is the deal? Anyways, the plane finally stops, and we hear through the captain, he says, if you are an American citizen, please do not get off the plane. I look around, and multiple people got off the plane because they were from multiple countries, but basically Americans stay in the plane, inside the plane. I asked around and said, where are we? We're in Somalia. It's a country with intensive, radical Islam that obviously Americans as a whole, that you have to be a Christian, just an American, and you're a target. So in my mind, on that moment, I was brought to my years of growing up, because some of you obviously know, and some of you can figure out this very easily, but what I have in front of me and what I thought about when I was there, I thought about this little document that says of the place of birth. This is my birth certificate from Mexico. I came to the States when I was 17, and in the year 2008, on September 26, I became a U.S. citizen. So please listen to me for a moment. I do have dual citizenship, but in that moment, all that I had with me was an American passport. So even though my origins of birth and my ethnicity may not be from this country, legally, which is what counts, legally, I'm an American citizen in foreign land where potentially I can be in trouble if I am thrown into this environment. Now listen to me for a moment. When we describe a man of double-minded, I am brought back into Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You know the story. Those are the fathers of the faith. And it is Jacob, the last one of the three, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he goes to what is going to become the father-in-law. And he looks at the father-in-law and says, I want your daughter. And the father-in-law says, you need to work for my daughter, and you're going to work for me 7 years. This is Jacob working for Rachel, which eventually Rachel is part of the legacy of having the 12 tribes or the 12 boys that James is writing thousands of years later on, because they become the nation of Israel. So Jacob, which eventually his name is changed to Israel, is the father of the nation of Israel. So this Jacob, before the boys, before marriage, he goes to the father-in-law and says, can I work for you and give me the daughter? He says, go ahead, let's make the deal. 7 years goes by, Jacob works for the father-in-law, and at the end, the father-in-law looks at Jacob and says, no, brother, you're not taking Rachel, you're taking Leah, my other daughter. So Jacob is like, come on, dude, you promised me Rachel. No, you're going to take Leah. So he takes Leah home as a wife, but Jacob comes back because he wanted that girl. He comes back and says, hey, what can I do to get Rachel? And he basically says, give me another 7 years. And literally Jacob works another 7 years for Rachel. And the Bible says, this is common back in those days, Jacob gets both of these ladies, both of these sisters as wives. Please look at me. The next verse in the story says that he hated Leah and he loved Rachel. When you and I read this hate-love dichotomy, it's not the hate that you typically or I typically have emotionally. It's describing someone, Leah in this case, that Jacob loved less. And Rachel, he loved more. So when I'm describing this double mind, it's a Christian, is a person that wants to love the world, wants to love, watch this. This is Jesus in Luke chapter 24. Unless you hate your father and mother, unless you hate even yourself, you're not worthy of following me. Remember that in the scriptures? So what he's saying is simply this. This word hate is not hate as an anti-love. It's simply loveless. A double-minded person. is a person that says, I believe in God, but I want to love everything exactly the same. So I'm not an atheist. I still believe in God. I still believe that Jesus is the only way, but I do still have some things that I still equally love. So when it comes to decision making, I make my decisions based on those two elements, and they are battling between themselves. See, the call this morning is not to negate the world. It's not to negate your marriage. It's simply to love less, whatever it is, even yourself, and to love God more. That's the call. That's how you avoid a double-minded church, a double-minded father, a double-minded wife, a double-minded single. Can I just make a quick commercial on that? Double-minded singles typically marry double-minded potential spouse. If you see a double-minded single person right now, if you're single, run away from that person. Because that implies that it's not that he negates the person of God, it's that he loves both equally. And there is sometimes that you might have to fly into Somalia, and you have to make a stand on what you really believe. We live in a time and age, the way things are moving right now, that you're going to have to make a stand to describe what you believe and why you believe it.